Where do we go from here, chap? I have no idea. It's absolutely bonkers, this whole melee madness, the aftermath of the no decision from McLaren. It's chaos. So we're going to talk about it because Andrea Stella has had some things to say. Of course he has. Andrea Stella, being the team principal of McLaren, will never miss an opportunity to give a cheeky soundbite even. We'll get to that. Trying to substantiate, justify even his decision to not switcheroo one Oscar Jack Piastri and one Lando Norris, who, by the way, is materially more advanced in the championship as of September 2024. Oh, the humanity. But first, let me tell you what's going on with Checo Perez. This was meant to be the topic. What's going on, Chad? This was meant to be the topic of conversation for this morning stream. I think Checo Perez is gone, so you know. I will be open and honest with you. I think this dude is done for. Why do you say that, Cameron? Well, I heard him talk. There was a cheeky soundbite that he gave after the race that alluded to something that was funny. Shenanigans going on. Cloak and daggers, smokes and mirrors. This is what Checo Perez had to say, and this is techie, bearing in mind all of the hullabaloo, the furore around asymmetric braking, torque steer, inertia valve, etc. Of course, the rumour is that per Lobato of the Zone Spain, per him, that Red Bull had to take something off their car, whether that was a fiddle brake, an inertia valve, whatever. Speculation and rumour central each and every single time. But Lobato said on a broadcast that he had consulted with some senior officials in the paddock, team members, and they told him that around the Chinese Grand Prix, the Red Bull had to take something off their car on the back of the suggestion that by teams that the Bulls that were red are doing something dodgy. The FIA concurred and they had to take that off. The rumour, per Lobato of the Zone Spain, is that this is what's driving the drop-off, the material drop-off in pace that Red Bull are experiencing. Now you can go and read the Mark Hughes article on Motorsport magazine. All F1 journalists are made equally, but some are made more equal than others. Go and check that out, and Mark Hughes argues to the contrary, that what's happened as far as the convergence stories, that Red Bull have lost time as versus Mercedes and McLaren. Ergo, the upgrades that the two aforementioned have bought, the Silver Arrows team and the papaya coloured team, that's what's driving the convergence. That what hasn't happened is that Red Bull have lost time to the rest of the grid, not named Mercedes and McLaren. That's what would have had to happen if indeed, or you would assume at least, if indeed they had a fiddle brake. That's Mark Hughes' thesis. You can go and read the article. On the back of that, you would think that one Checo Perez, on the back also of the 1+1 deal, on the back of all the rancor, that he was due to get sacked off, notwithstanding the release of his Not Dead in Das Cabrón documentary, during which all he talks about is overcoming adversity, making it through to F1, notwithstanding substantial challenges and stumbling blocks, tropiezos as they say in Spain. That all of these things contributed, plus the $17 million that he brings into the team courtesy of the sponsorship of one Carlos Slim. Notwithstanding all of the aforementioned, many of the F1 community have argued that he has no place in Formula One, let alone Red Bull Racing, the premier motorsport team in Formula One over the past 24 months. What has he done other than underperformed materially each and every single time? So you would think, against the backdrop of this as context, that Checo Perez would be on his best behaviour, that he would be paying attention to every single syllable, let alone every single word that comes out of his mouth, making sure not to cheese off Christian Horner. And I thought this a couple of races ago, or even last race at the Dutch Grand Prix, the way that he attacked one Sir Lewis, Carl Davidson Hamilton, for impeding him during qualifying. It felt like, in my mind at least, he was desperately trying to curry favour with Christian Horner by virtue of his attack on Sir Lewis over the radio. Again, if I go hard at Lewis, we then have a mutual enemy, don't we? If I'm Checo Perez, thinking of team principal Christian Horner, you got to foster rapport with the decision makers. That's what I thought Checo Perez was doing. Oh no, how wrong could I have been? Because after this weekend's Italian Grand Prix at Monza, Checo Perez even had this to say. It's a bit weird, and again, reminiscent of Toto, the boy who cried wolf, who's also been saying something similar about Red Bull's drop-off in performance. Here's what Checo Perez had to say. And this is where it gets techie, chat. Do you know what I mean? Checo Perez had this to say. He goes, Max Verstappen now, as far as his understeer problems, having problems with the balance fundamentally of the RB20 car. What Max Verstappen is experiencing now, all of a sudden, I've been experiencing all season. That's what Checo Perez is saying. Number 2 at Red Bull Racing, driver pairing with Maximilian Verstappen. He said that's kind of weird. It's a bit funny that. Oh, the humanity. Is that Checo Perez or is that Toto, the boy who cried wolf? Who, by the way, said something very similar about Red Bull's drop-off in performance. He said that Red Bull, all of a sudden, that they've dropped so materially in terms of their performance is a little bit weird. And again, unspoken, alluding to the fact that this asymmetric braking story just will not go away. What's driving this then was the insinuation, therefore, of both Toto Wolff, again, arch enemy and nemesis of Christian Horner, and so too Checo Perez, driver at Red Bull Racing. Again, I'm going to reiterate for the avoidance of doubt, because this is techie, ladies and gents. Checo Perez, after the Italian Grand Prix, had this to say: it's very weird that Max Verstappen all of a sudden is having the problems that I've been dealing with all flipping season. It's a bit odd that, said Checo Perez. What's he insinuating, ladies and gentlemen? As if Christian Horner and the Bulls that are red don't have enough F1 commentators and speculators and aggregators and content creators talking about this asymmetric braking stuff already. Torque, steer, inertia valve settings, whatever you want to call it, fiddle brake. Enough people are talking about this already without Checo Perez coming and giving all of those people a massive gift. He now is speculating around the drop-off in the performance that Maximilian Verstappen is talking about. Fundamental balance not there on the RB20. Why? Well, it's understeering. We understand already that understeery ground effect cars are absolutely, they almost go hand in hand, understeer and ground effect cars. But they didn't used to suffer from that, did they? As early as this season, the first 5 races, Maximilian Verstappen was dominant, killing it. The RB20 was the all-conquering, kicking off, picking up from the RB, where the RB19 left off. Now what? Something has happened. Checo Perez now leaning into the conspiracy theory that many tinfoil hat wearers have been buying into for the longest time, myself included to a certain extent. Joe P finishing the same area code as Max for once, and now he's trying to make it seem that they are now even. Are we talking about Lando? Oh, the humanity. We'll get onto Lando. So only Max had the Sid, that's what it feels like Checo Perez is saying, if indeed anybody had the valve. If indeed anybody had the valve, because it's always speculative, isn't it? Oh, the humanity. Visual. Yeah, please give the like, or Rob, you're a legend, visual, Mikel. But Checo cannot tell what the problems are with the car. Well, he can feel it though, Mikel. If he's talking about understeer, material, combined entry to each and every single turn, then Checo would be able to feel that and speak to it now. Or maybe I'm missing something. And I only say all of that about Checo Perez to say this. I think he sees the end coming. I think this is a stay of execution. We've been talking about this for the past 3-4 months, that materially, as far as his line of travel in performance turf, he's been absolutely nowhere. Red Bull should have sacked him off about 4 or 5 races ago. The problem with Red Bull that they're facing is one of timing. Why, therefore, would you sack off Checo Perez before the 2 tracks that you can almost guarantee he should go well around? Spa isn't his thing. Again, he's a rear limited Donny, isn't he, Checo Perez? Brilliant at getting on the accelerator on the combined exit from very slow minimum speed turns. Please see as an example a Rascasse. That's his bag. That's why they say he'll go well around Baku and Singapore. Why? Well, because if past his prologue, he has gone well around these tracks in his career. So why then would you sack him off now? There's no point in actioning even the stop loss now, just before Baku and Singapore. Let Baku and Singapore transpire, see how he gets on there, and have a conversation afterwards. Helmut Marko and Christian Horner will reconvene to discuss this circumstance, this automotive pugilism Rubik's Cube for which they have to solve for, called Checo Perez. Oh, the humanity. And lest we forget that Danny Rick has been talking, hasn't he? He says as soon as next week there's going to be an announcement potentially about his future tied in with that of Liam Lawson. Lest we forget, Liam Lawson has a clause in his contract, and again I think it's due to come into play on the 12th of this month, less than 10 days time. If they haven't found him a drive, whether Red Bull Racing family or otherwise, by such time, he can go and find himself. He can null and void his contract with immediate effect and go and find himself another job, another F1 drive, and he will not be short of suitors. Again, he looked brilliant last year, didn't he, when deputising for Danny Rick? One wonders why they didn't just keep him in the car then and bench Danny Rick, Honey Badger. Well, we know why, because Danny Rick is the adopted son of one Christian Horner, and Christian Horner is the one making the decisions, holding the red pen, pulling the Red Bull Racing purse strings. Joe, the downfall of Newey, the downfall of Red Bull since Newey announcement needs to be studied. Absolutely, mate. Needs the right white papers need to be written on that attic. May Horner and others who said we don't need Newey walk, but give them the Cersei treatment. Shame. Listen, all right. Let me tell you about Andrea Stella before we talk. We'll talk about Red Bull shortly. But let me tell you about Andrea Stella, because I'm still festering from the abomination as far as F1 decision making that we saw take place at the Italian Grand Prix yesterday. Don't let me have to go scorched earth again. How the hell did they not switch? Okay, you can make the case, as Andrea Stella does, that what they wanted to do is have Oscar Piastri pressure Charles Leclerc into a mistake. But as at the last lap, you know what time it is. Charles Leclerc has done all that he needed to do. Switch them then, surely. Are you telling me that the 18 points means that much to Oscar Piastri, and the equality as far as the team ethos, that is the papaya-coloured team, that's how much that means? Behave yourself, Andrea Stella. Put on your big boy shorts, chaps. There are decisions that need to be made. Look, here's the stakes. The World Drivers' Championship is on the line here. You'll probably get the constructors anyway, because that RB20 has fallen off massively, not just in the hands of Checo Perez now, because Maximilian Verstappen can't manage it either, with Checo Perez insinuating that he's been getting done over, sabotaged courtesy of Red Bull Racing all bloody season. Red Bull are falling apart at the seams. Now then is your time to aprovecharlo, McLaren. What are we doing? Take advantage of it, surely, when your rivals, the other protagonists in both the drivers and constructors, are at their weakest. No, they didn't bother. They didn't choose to effect team orders because they're so fair. United colours of Benetton. And this sticks in the mind of many an F1 fan, right? You saw Will Buxton on the F1 TV broadcast absolutely lose his mind. Why? Well, because he's devastated as a neutral, as a non-partisan member of the community. He's devastated that McLaren seem to be wasting away their opportunity. You're blowing it, kid, in the words of the legend that is Angelo Dundee. Well, today, Andrea Stella's come out and he's talked about it. You heard him pre-race saying that they will give, if it's not 50-50 and Lando needs help, then we will help him. Though, he wants Lando to just race his way to victory. He doesn't want to need any help. And this speaks to Lando's personality as well. Lando being so benevolent, in inverted commas, a stark contrast from the killers that were Michael Schumacher and Fernando Alonso and Ayrton Senna and Lewis too, when he'd had his Weetabix. In stark contrast to those, Lando's not that type to get in front of these messages. You didn't hear him over the radio demanding of McLaren that they pulled the switcheroo, as would have done a Schumacher, an Alonso, or a Lewis, or a Senna. They would have been on McLaren and Zach Brown and Andrea Stella would have had to manage their stakehold in real time in front of the world for everybody, viewers all over the world to see in real time. It would have been beef, but Lando Norris is too passive, too nice a guy, too subordinate, too submissive even. This is what Andrea Stella had to say, team principal of McLaren. And by the way, he's a god-tier racing mind, this chap. Pep Guardiola settings of F1. But here's what he had to say. And bear in mind the context before I tell you this. Table setting. You remember that a key factor, the one stop, ultimately is what got Charles Leclerc that victory. But a key factor in McLaren not being able to pull off the one stop is A, they didn't have the sexy rear wing that Ferrari had. You know, that bloody hybrid one that they brought specifically for the Italian Grand Prix. And B, that meant that as far as the grip and their ability to mitigate for tyre deg in real time was affected to the downside. What are you talking about, Cameron? Well, you heard Lando post-race say that the rears were fine as far as tyre deg. What they struggled with is understeer, though, in the lower minimum speed turns. What are you talking about, Cameron? This is Monza. Well, chicane 1. You need to get your speed down. Chicane 2, super slow minimum turns. You remember that's where Oscar Piastri overtook Lando Norris. So those turns were always going to cause McLaren an issue. Why? Because they didn't have fundamentally enough grip. Lando Norris spoke to this after the race, that it wasn't an issue with tyre deg at the rear because that's where the fundamental design philosophy is super grippy and mitigates, offsets any sort of tyre deg. It was at the front. Why? Well, because Oscar Piastri in free practice had spoken about this. In their long runs, he said that any mistake, any lockups were going to turn those front tyres into 50p pence pieces. Coin settings, hexagon settings even, and that was always going to be an issue. Therefore, the probability was that a one-stop strategy, unless you were perfect and didn't make any mistakes, no lockups, that a one-stop strategy, Oscar Piastri told McLaren, his race engineer, Zach Brown, Andrea Stella, that a one-stop probably wasn't the way to go for them. Here's what Andrea Stella had to say then about that, about the decision. Remember, front and centre of the brain, that context as I read you out these, about the decision not to pull the switcheroo on Oscar Jack and Lando towards the end of the Grand Prix yesterday. Here's what he had to say. Drink this in, ladies and gents. Quote, "We considered other ways during the race to make sure Lando had his opportunities, but we didn't consider the swap." Joe P. Mikhail, they didn't even consider the swap. But I digress. Even because we were still willing to put as much pressure as possible on Charles Leclerc, eventually induce him to have a problem with the front left like a lockup in one of the chicanes. Hang on, mate. What happened on the last lap, chap? What are you saying, Andrea Stella? You're saying that you wanted to push Charles Leclerc via Oscar Piastri into making a mistake. Yeah, but by the end of the last lap, chap, you realise what was going to happen. Charles Leclerc had it in the bag. It was all under control. So you mean to tell me, Andrea Stella, that then, even towards the latter stage of the last lap, you didn't think to pull the switcheroo for an additional 3 points in a championship, a driver's champs, where every point is going to count? You've already given away, as far as Lando Norris is concerned, 7 points in terms of the variance between him and Mr. Maximilian Verstappen, and now you go and give away another 3 points. 10 points is the variance that you just fritter away. That's not even considering pit stops and mistakes, strategy errors that they've made at Silverstone and Belgium. Forget those. These are the low-hanging fruit ones. What are they talking about, chat? Mikhail, swap is no papaya rule. I just papaya rule. Even that, you heard Peter Windsor in my conversation with him earlier. He was like, papaya rules. What are they talking about? Papaya rules. Mate, this makes sense, Jack. It's nonsense. It is absolutely daft what they're leaning into. What they're talking about in the papaya rules is a propensity to sacrifice this drivers' championship that could very well be Lando Norris's at the altar of this altruistic team ethos where we race as one. Sack that off, Andrea Stella. You're a brilliant racing mind, Zach Brown too, as well as commercial. Now I understand that this is an unexpected circumstance, a paradigm shift as far as your ability to win races and championships, that this wasn't in the forecast, not as soon as September of 2024. McLaren thought that they were going to be in a position to challenge at the very earliest 2025, but yet and still, I say for the avoidance of doubt, these opportunities don't come along too often. This genuinely is rarefied air. Move accordingly then. Andrea Stella, Zach Brown. Stella continues about this Charles Leclerc challenge. What are they talking about? Quote, I think without Leclerc, Lando and Oscar would have been close enough that they could have played with some other variables. Yeah, but come on, Andrea. Come on. He doesn't rate Norris. He can't rate Norris if he's talking and moving like this. What are we talking about here, Andrea Stella? Do you understand what this is? Where your papaya rules even needed to be in effect, because had you outlined those properly as far as your rules of engagement between Messrs Norris and Piastri, you wouldn't have had to deal with the incident at the second chicane, would you? Because you would have instituted for some proper rules and regs between the drivers. How have you got Oscar Piastri pulling that, or even endeavouring that very speculative manoeuvre at the second chicane? Off the back of which Lando Norris's oversteer means that he sacrifices an additional place. Charles Leclerc, that falls right into his hands. This is nonsense, honestly. I cannot. Andrea Stella continues, that does not necessarily mean that we now swap positions, because I don't think, at least, this wasn't part of our agreement. Why was it not, Andrea Stella? They're just not putting any respect on a Drivers' Championship, are they? They don't care. They really don't care. I love Peter Windsor's his supposition that maybe their strategic objective doesn't have within it the Drivers' Championship. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe they just want to fight, and maybe it's maybe this is a PR shill of sorts. It's a little brutal. Here's where it is, Robert. They keep making up the phrases on the spot like papaya rules to cover their own asses. Lando will be shell shocked after that race. He looks broken, and why wouldn't he look broken? Of course, anybody would be broken. It's chaos. Bottas is a Perez level driver. Behave. Perez level? I don't know. That's out for debate. Brown said he still thinks it's very unlikely that they'll get the WDC anyway. So probably on Jay, I can't even Jay. Even if there is, look, if there's 0.1% of a probability, you invest therefore in it. Stack the odds in your favour, right? Try and optimise for your opportunity. But I feel like I'm barking at the wrong tree as far as McLaren are concerned, especially when Andrea Stella says this. It looks a little brutal if you ask a driver who was going to win a race, he gained on track, that you have to swap positions. Who cares, Andrea Stella, what it looks like, chap? No one will. Especially not when you have yourself a World Driver Championship trophy to add to your cabinet. You haven't even got that. When was the last time that McLaren won a championship? 2007, for Pete's sake. As near as makes no difference, 20 years. So what are we doing here, Andrea Stella, really? Well, I don't understand. Going on like your Man City and you've been in winning loads. You haven't won for ages. Adjust, therefore, the way in which you move. Your modus operandi, if indeed you harbour aspirations of winning yourself a cheeky Drivers' Championship, need to change in real time, soon-ish. Stella continues, but we will review all these things for the next races, and if we come to the conclusion together that swapping is the right thing to do, then we will do it. Well, mate, it might be too late now. You may as well save your breath. Might be too late, chap. You've already given up 10 points. God forbid Lando Norris comes within 10 points of winning that championship. Can you imagine, as at the final race of this year, the race 24, if Lando Norris is, say, 9 points away from the championship, the 3 points that he gave away this race weekend, or that McLaren gave away by not swapping them, in addition to the 7 points that he gave away by switching Oscar Jack Piastri and Lando Norris at Hungary. What are we doing here? In that case, the stop happened on track because the team controlled the sequence of the pit stop, so he's justifying Hungary, controlled the pit stop, so it was the team that swapped the positions, he concluded. And let's talk about that very quickly. Visual, Lando did ruin Oscar's win. Mate, well, I don't even know what else is he going to do? You expect him to just be happy and all smiles? No chance. What did we do in 2007? Was the last time, mate? Bonkers. Or 2008. What am I on about? 2007 was Kimi, wasn't it? 2008. Tyson, you're a legend, mate. A proper legend out here gifting memberships. Joe, that would be hilarious. Jendrick, have you seen Andrea Stella and Lando being held hostage? I haven't seen them yet. It's techie. You're a proper legend, Tyson, and I'm grateful for you each and every single time in your generosity, mate. Gifting memberships out here. Jomo says, you know it's all going to get close at the end of the season if the racing gods have a hand. I feel like the racing gods would deliberately do something like this to teach Zach Brown and Andrea Stella a lesson about racing and how to conduct for it. The way that Andrea Stella's talking here, what do you mean it wouldn't look good? What are you talking about? Like, what are the stakes? Again, you got to work this back from your strategic objectives, just like my guy Peter D. Windsor said. If indeed you harbour aspirations of winning yourself a championship, then every point matters always. You can't afford to give away 3, not to Red Bull and Max Verstappen, no. And you definitely can't afford to give away the 7 that you gave away at the Hungarian Grand Prix. What are we doing here? This is, honestly, I cannot compute for this level of stupidity. And some fans will say that that's what we want to see, that you can't give anybody anything, that a first or a second or a third place needs to be earned. Shouldn't expect it from your teammates or anybody else, right? Because this is Formula One, and that's fine under normal circumstances. But when you're competing for a driver's championship, this is not normal circumstances. How? Why? Well, if past his prologue, and we look back at Alonso and we look back at Schumacher, each and every single time that they had opportunity to take points, they were killers with it. They would take such opportunities without compunction, with impunity. Why? Because they are Formula One drivers, some of the greatest and most ruthless that we've ever seen. I say all that to say this. I know it's fool's gold to draw a thread, a common denominator between the most recent champs, and talk about the characteristics even that they epitomised, being of course ruthlessness, resilience, a steely type of focus, and aggression even. It is absolutely fool's gold to expect Lando Norris and his personality even to mirror for those, and to even conclude that because he doesn't have those, that Lando Norris cannot, nor will he ever be a driver's champion. I think by how close he is to Maximilian Verstappen, as at the 2nd of the 9th, 2024, he is the case against the antithesis to that thesis. I think Lando could win this thing, you know, with the right thing, with the right team behind him, the right amount of support, and critically, some key decisions being made in earnest, in real time. The key decisions that matter, like as an example, this weekend past the decision in the latter stages of the last lap to switch one Oscar Jack Piastri for one Lando Norris. If McLaren can get their head together, get their SH1T together and start making these decisions effecting for them in real time, Lando Norris absolutely has a chance. Otherwise, McLaren will lean into the low-hanging trope that so many F1 teams have done previously in celebrating mediocrity and being shocked at their ability to compete for races and championships. They will lean into this, seizing defeat yet again from the jaws of victory.